Okay, so we should get going. Hello, everybody. Okay. I hope everybody is doing well. And what we're going to do today is just recap about the COVID-19 issues that we still face as listing agents and buyer's agents. But oh boy, how much fun. Now we're going to talk about the new listing agreement that's effective May 1st and the new coming soon status by MLS. And we'll go through what the listing agents need to be aware of and buyer's agents on the COVID-19. So what I've done is I provided the links that we have been giving out. NAR came out with several links. They talk about guidance for open houses, transactions, and just general information for brokers and realtors. The CDC link takes them directly to what they are recommending for disinfecting your home. And so those would be the only provisions that we would ever recommend would be what has been provided to us by the CDC. The other thing is, because you are an essential business, make sure you always have your license with you. We haven't heard of anybody being stopped lately. So probably that's not an issue, but we just want to make sure that you have it with you at all times on something like that. Okay, here's what happened. Last year, NAR voted to create a clear cooperation policy, and that was a direct result of investigations that they had done. And the investigations had showed that agents who or realtors who take non-MLS listings or don't place their listings in MLS were actually shown to have been using discriminatory practices. And it's not that they were on purpose trying to discriminate, but because they called a certain sphere that they would tell about their listing, they did practice discrimination. So because that, NAR came out with a clear cooperation policy. You have two things. We have the new listing agreement, which is what the Texas Realtors came out with, that actually reinforces the clear cooperation policy in the changes that they made. And it is in paragraph 6 of the listing agreement. There are a couple of other changes. They had to do some things. They created a capital P down here at the bottom, but we're just not going to pay attention to that. That was housekeeping type of things. But what we're going to do is talk about paragraph 6, because that's what's really important. That is the notice regarding public marketing. So as of May 1st, everyone has to abide by the MLS rules, even if your listing was prior to this. It goes into effect on May 1st. And what it means is that if the property is publicly marketed, that means a sign, websites, your special displays that you have, or any other area, email blast or whatever, you must now place it in MLS within 1 business day. There is no more of this putting a sign out in the yard, advertising it, and then not placing it in MLS. That was the real indication that NAR was trying to accomplish, and they did so by having the policy modified. Now, what happens on this, there are a couple of things. If you fill in 6A1A, you have to put your listing in within how many days? Not 5 days that's here, 3 days. Those are your MLS rules and regulations. So again, some agents feel that that's not enough time. They still want an enforceable listing agreement with the seller, but that's not enough time for them to get everything taken care of. So a lot of agents pick 6A1B. The moment you mark B, there is a fill in the blank that says that they won't list it in MLS within so many days after the listing begins for the following purposes. This fill in the blank can never be more than 14 days per your HAR. This coming soon status is what really is on this paragraph here. And then you have to place the purpose of it. So we're going to talk a little bit about HAR's coming soon status that they are going to have for you as of May 1st. But before we do that, I want to get through the second thing. Now, the biggest concern that you're going to have, if your seller chooses not to put it in MLS, they can still do that. But they have to understand that they can't tell anybody that their property is for sale either. That would be a public type of notice. And once you do that, and your seller is now bound to tell you if they do that, because within 1 business day, you must place it in MLS if the seller is out there publicly stating that their property is for sale. You won't be able to have any buyers come with an offer to your non-MLS listing unless they are buyers under the current brokerage. Again, it's going to be a brokerage exclusive listing. There will not be any public advertising anywhere regarding it. So again, it's a warning, and it's real important that this warning is adhered to, but it even tells the seller, look, if you go out there and you have your own little website or sphere, you're not going to be able to do that as well. So the moment you do advertise it, because this is a non-MLS, you must tell me, because now we must put it in MLS within 1 day. So as I said, those are the biggest changes that we faced as of May 1st. No yard signs, nothing for coming soon, no yard signs ever for a non-MLS listing. The other area where it changed is in paragraph 13. In paragraph 13, it says, if box 6A2 is checked, and that was the one that says I'm a non-MLS listing, you are bound, sellers, and you promise in paragraph 13 that you will notify us, because the minute it is, we have to place it in MLS within 1 business day. So that's a really big issue. The coming soon status, which is what we're going to talk about now, involves what HAR decided to do to implement a new status. If you put the listing in, say you had that 6A1B mark where within 14 days you were not going to be putting it into MLS, but you have a listing agreement. They have a new status called coming soon. That status would only be able to be viewed by the agents participating in MLS. It's not going to be to anybody else. It's a special status. And so the listings can stay in coming soon, as I said, for up to 14 days. Okay. If it's prior to 14 days, you can make it active at any time. The listing will automatically, when you as an agent go in and place this listing in the coming soon status, the listing will automatically reclassify to withdrawn if it exceeds 14 days. So that's what MLS is going to do to you on these coming soon status. No showings are allowed during coming soon. If you do show it, you're ready to be active, period. This all comes from your MLS at HAR. The coming soon listings are not displayed on the HAR.com or sent to other portals. It won't happen until the listing becomes active. Again, they're abiding by no public will be aware of this listing until it goes active. If you place a coming soon sign or otherwise market a listed property, it must be added within 1 business day. So the coming soon signs aren't going to be possible, because the moment you put it in the property, you have to put it in MLS in 1 day. And agents were using the coming soon sign to kind of get activity and let them know we're not ready. That no longer applies. As I said, that's a concern of advertisement that they had in paragraph 6, that you can't do that unless you put it in MLS within 1 business day. It says the search. This is where a lot of agents are kind of confused. You can search coming soon listings as an agent. You're just, as a listing agent of a coming soon status in MLS, you can't show the property until it becomes active. That's the way that they're abiding by the clear cooperation policy. Photos are not required, but can be added to coming soon listings. And adding a coming soon listing is just like a new active listing in Matrix. Before you can save it as active, you'll have to either choose as an active or coming soon. So they're going to prompt you on those things. So that's everything that HAR MLS is taking care of on the new status, the coming soon status. Now,
Marilyn?
What?
Okay, so you just mentioned that the photos are not required in the coming soon MLS status. When are photos now required?
They've been required the same requirements that they have always had. You have to have them within 10 days of listing it. And because you brought that up, I am going to tell you that next month I'm going to review the MLS rules and regulations. I cannot believe how many agents don't know how many photographs they have to have, when the status has to be there, what do they do to update it. They're acting like they don't have to report any sales that happen on a listing, that they can terminate it so that the listing won't be in the MLS. So next month, we're going to go through all of the top MLS issues that we tend to see agents getting fines for, that they're not abiding by it.
I really appreciate that, because I see quite a lot of times that there are properties that I want to consider with people that I'm working with as buyers, and there's no photos, and the listings are out there for weeks and weeks and weeks with no photos. So thank you. I appreciate that.
They have to be within 10 days of the listing day. The other thing about coming soon status is it doesn't affect your days on market. And that's a good thing for you. It goes into the system, you're all ready to make it active, but not until it goes active does it count the days on market. That's at least what they said in their presentation last month. Now, on our listing side, the biggest issue about this COVID-19, besides the fact that it scares everybody and everybody's panic about all of these things, bottom line is your sellers and your landlords are going to make the decision. We can give them guidance like I gave you on the links. We can give them references and guidance, but they're going to make the hard decision. I am going to advise you that if you have a seller or landlord who says, I don't care, anybody can see the property, and oh, by the way, I'm not going to clean it between showings and disinfect it, the sellers and landlords would have to know that you would disclose that to any prospective buyer coming or tenant coming onto the property. We have several forms that listing agents should use. I had to make up several of these. These came before Texas Realtors had the one about the property access, where everybody has to sign it, not just the buyer's agent or the tenant agent, but everybody in the party has to sign it before it's shown. And the reason for that is, in the event that a seller or landlord says, you know, I'm not going to clean that up between showings, this is the posting that's the notice read before entering. And the phrase here, enter at your own risk, is what is so important, that it be posted at the door of entry. And the reason for that is because it says if you answer yes to any of these questions, you don't go in. In other words, the seller or the landlord, because they're not going to use disinfect, the buyer knows that because you've already told the buyer agent as well as the tenant agent. The issue for the buyer and tenant and their agents is that they would have to answer these questions before entering. In other words, the seller or the landlord has said, look, I'm not going to clean it between times, but you're entering at your own risk. And so the sellers and landlords are transferring that risk to the parties that are entering the property. It's a material fact. If you know that the landlords and sellers are not going to clean between showings, you probably want to give that information to the agent that is going to be working in behalf of those parties, because you just don't want them to be surprised. Some people are assuming everybody's taking care of all this, and it's not. I am going to tell you that.
Should we put that in the agent remarks?
What?
That it's not going to be clean between showings? You
can. Everybody mute yourself. If you have any questions, go up to the chat. I'll answer them. I'll try and get through those at the end of time. Yes. Everything I'm talking about better be in your listing agreement. That's my big concern for you right now, is that needs to be actually done. Now, I had a showing confirmation form that's very simple. The attorney that works with me reviewed it. And it's similar to what that posting is on that door of access. But it says you need to get the answers to all of these questions as well as your clients. And it says if you've responded yes to any of these, sellers may deny your showings. Everybody mute, please. I'm hearing somebody. And again, it's up to what the sellers and landlord want to do. I gave you these as examples to follow, but they certainly can add all of their provisions that they want. They can add your instructions, but you need to place them in your listing agreement. We're not going to take liability for a seller who won't disinfect between showings or doesn't do certain things. We're not going to absorb any of that risk at all during this time. It goes all on the seller or the landlord. So make sure that everything that you have, that you and the sellers and landlords have decided in writing how the showings will go, who is allowed access, what they might have to qualify for access. Place that in your MLS, in your listing agreement and special provisions. We don't want you to leave any of these to sidebar conversations. We want it known that you're not going to take the liability for this situation between what the sellers and landlords choose to do or not to do. Again, the posting on the access door is very important, because even though the seller or landlord may have said, I'll show the property, I want 2 days between showings, whatever that access that the landlord or seller has requested, the problem for you is if they did it, 2 days ago, and then they go there and now they may have some of those symptoms, they literally, the seller's saying, don't enter if you have any of these issues at all. Again, it's up to your sellers and landlords to do this. I've been involved in some mega agent sessions in the last few weeks from some of the offices, and they've given, we just talk in general about areas of concern and what they're doing. And there was a team leader of a big group, and he said that he gets all of he got his buyer's agents together and he told them, here's some supplies. Your buyers prospects should all be providing their own mask, but the team lead agent happened to have a lot of supplies and was giving the supplies to the buyer's agents and telling them to follow all the CDC guidelines and those types of things. But was supplying gloves to them and wipes and disinfectant, all these different kinds of things. Some sellers have had it posted that you can't walk into the property with shoes on. In other words, he gave little blue things that go up around the shoes, or that he asked them to remove them outside and not come into the property. Again, it's basically what your sellers and landlords will agree to. At no time should we feel that we have to pressure them to do this. This is their decision. They're taking all the liability and risk for this. You are not. That's what I'm trying to get to you, that in your listing agreement, you'll have all of these things attached, completed, whatever the seller landlord agrees to on something like that. Let's see. Okay. All right, let me see what we got here on some of the questions. I assume we need to amend current agreement. Well, in the event you're talking about your listing agreement, when you're talking about amending it to add any of these forms and those type of things, if that is the case, absolutely on something like that. Can still, for sell by owner, do public marketing without having it in MLS. You're not subject as a seller of a property when you're not a realtor that has a listing agreement. So they're two different things. A seller can stick a sign out in their yard that says for sale by owner, but they're not going to have a listing agreement with another broker to do something like that. Yeah, you should always amend the listing agreement if you've already got one. Say you had one 2 months ago and this thing came up and y'all have been working under a plan that the seller or the landlord has provided. I would better for you to amend the listing so everybody understands this is how it's going to be done and this is what the parties agreed to. Absolutely. That's the safest way for you to be able to do that. Okay. The COVID-19 forms, there are a few of them that they have for commercial. The ones that I gave are generic, so anybody could use those. But Texas Realtors has a few COVID documents for the commercial as well. You know, one of the question is, even though the seller said they'll clean the properties between showings, do we need to confirm that this was actually done? This is a problem for you. We're not the inspector of the property. And so if you're going to feel that you need to confirm this, I think the most you would be able to do is what? Send an email. Did you disinfect between the showings? But whatever's in your listing agreement that the sellers are going to abide by, that is what is going to be on the sellers or the landlords, not on you on something like that. So absolutely get it in your listing agreement. But every time, if they're telling you they're going to do something, you could rely upon this. I don't think those forms are in the KW intranet. Those are all on .loop under the COVID-19 folder that's in there. I don't think they're in .loop. That's where I know that they are. Let's see. Okay. Okay, a lot of them are please sign me in. So we'll go on into the next part. Okay, now we're going to get to the buyer part. And for buyer's agents, they have a unique situation. Number one is they could have a buyer that might be hesitant to enter a property, right? And they said, no, I'd rather just make an offer sight unseen. The moment you have a buyer that wants to do that, you're going to go in there and add to the buyer tenant agreement a provision that talks about the buyer is assuming all liability in doing that. Not you. I provided one. It was a little bit more expanded, and the reason for that is because it became aware to us that not only are they entering the property at their own risk, and they're taking a risk by putting an offer on a property sight unseen. The problem was we found out that a lot of appraisals were not being conducted in a physical appraisal that normally happens where the appraiser enters the property. They were actually doing it, going on the outside only, and then doing what they call a desktop basis. So we want to make sure as buyer's agents that you've got all of this covered. And really your lender is your only source about the appraisals. And ask the lenders. They know the situation that's going on, what the appraisers are going to do. And so make sure that you connect with the lender. It's very, very important at this time. What I am going to tell you, what I have gotten a lot of questions is they said, well, if we don't, if it's a sight unseen, can the buyer still do their inspections? Well, paragraph 7A of the contract is very clear. It allows access at reasonable times, and it doesn't take it away just because of COVID. If the seller is not going to allow that, I think the seller probably is going to have to withdraw their property, because you're not going to go under contract and not let a buyer do it. And one of the good things is a lot of the somebody's got their need to be muted. One of the great things about a lot of the inspectors, I know because I'm getting all their emails, is at this point in time, they have told a seller or a buyer, this is how I'm conducting these inspections during this time. This is how I'll leave your property. And it would be great in the event that your buyer chose an inspector that does have that kind of policy on what they're going to do. I think it'd be really good that they, as a buyer's agent, that you provide that information to the listing agent so that the seller knows who the inspector is. They have to know who they are anyway, but this is how the inspector is going to follow their inspection on your property. Okay, somebody needs to mute. Okay. Okay. Here's the problem for buyer's agents as well. Because of this element, we had a horrible thing that happened gosh, it was the 1st of April, I think, when FHA suspended and for the first time had these requirements.
Well done, fries, extra pickles, and the mac and cheese. Okay, thank you.
Well, if you are getting food for yourself, you should be getting it for all of us. please mute so that we don't
Marilyn,
hear
I
that.
think you can universally mute somebody from the presenter screen. I think you can universally mute everybody from the presenter screen.
Yeah, and somebody else needs to do that. I'm too busy doing all the other things that I do with the screens. So what you're going to do is, before your buyer goes under contract, the buyer really needs to have you and the lender and the buyer all on the same page. Tap in on the lender's resources. They absolutely know what's going on in appraisals. Are the appraisers doing the on-site, or are they doing a desktop appraisal on those types of things? Make sure that, you know, the lender is, whatever the concerns might be for the lender, you want to make sure that the buyer's offer is going to be able to support that. In other words, these closings that happen very quickly, or maybe the buyers don't have enough time for buyer approval. Say, for instance, the COVID-19 addendum is not on the contract. The buyers want longer time to be individually approved in the event that they might lose their job and no longer be approved. All these different things you need to get with the lender. The buyer and you and the lender really need to be on the same page, and tap in on what their resources are and what they know about appraisals and everything going on right now. And they may need to ask for longer time. And so you don't want a contract executed when right away going in, you've already known you have to negotiate differently with the seller regarding timeframes. Sellers, you know, sometimes are understandable about certain timeframes, but they're also under stress right now. If they have to move and they have to buy another one, they really want the buyer to have presented a true picture in the offer that they have presented. And as I said, the COVID-19 addendum, as a buyer's agent, you're going to want to have that on every contract offer that you make. Or if it was done after you had an executed contract, you're going to attempt to add the COVID-19 addendum. And the reason for that is it'll show to your buyers, look, I tried to get this done for you. This is a document we've received from Texas Realtors. Unfortunately, the sellers have declined it. They will not accept it. It usually doesn't mean that the buyers won't go forward with the property. There just might need to be more adjustments on some of the time frames, like in third-party financing. Again, just make sure that the buyers know that while you're attempting to get this COVID-19 addendum, there is no guarantee that a seller will agree to it. Most of the sellers that we've had respond to it when they understand it. They say, look, I don't want to sign this, but you know, let's just wait until it occurs and then we'll decide contractually at that time. And amendments have been done for all these purposes before. The COVID-19 addendum was a response by Texas Realtors to really help realtors with their parties to maybe be a little more proactive about, if this happens, then these could be the issues. The problem for sellers is they don't particularly like it because it favors the buyers always getting their earnest money back, even if something happened and they lost their job and things like that. But again, no seller has to agree to it. It doesn't help any cash transaction. I had 3 agents this past week that tried to do it on a cash transaction, and I said there's an operative word in paragraph B. It says financing. So again, it doesn't help a cash purchaser at all on something like that. So please only use it appropriately. It can only be on contract forms. I have a lot of agents who are trying to get Ashton Woods and all these other builders, KB, everybody to do it, and they're not going to do it. They're not required to do it. Plus, they're not supposed to have a form that's not meant for their contracts. They present their own contracts. The only thing I'm going to tell you is you're going to have to pay really close attention to all the deadlines that are in the contract. We have a horrible mess that went on last week for several days, and here's what happened. It was intermediary, unfortunately, and the buyer's appraisal wasn't picked up for 2 weeks. Well, I don't know about you, but the buyer's agents kept asking the lender, do you have the appraisal? When is it going to be done? Lender didn't respond. The moment a lender doesn't respond, the buyer/borrower, the borrower and the lender have a fiduciary duty. That borrower needs to call the lender and say, talk to my agents or tell me. Turns out the appraiser wouldn't pick it up, and it was delayed 2 weeks. It was done the day before closing. I don't know about you, but appraisal's done the day before closing on the day. So again, it's one of those situations. The listing agent should know this. The listing agent couldn't have been surprised by it because appraisals aren't done the day before closing. They're done hopefully 7 to 10 days before closing at best. Some of them are done even sooner than that. Keller Mortgage agents have told me that they're doing it, during the termination option. So again, be very careful about the process along the contract. Both listing agents know about these things as buyer's agents, and to get to the day before closing to not have the appraisal, nobody's going to be real happy about extending the closing date. These same agents said, well, I sent the COVID-19 over to have the seller sign it. I said, well, I'm not asking if you sent it. I'm asking if it was a fully executed addendum that is a part of the contract. And the answer is always no. The seller wouldn't agree to it. So you can't make up and say, well, it had COVID-19 issues. That's not how it's going to work unless that addendum was a part of the contract. But again, you need to pay real close attention to that. The timeline is that I provided is really important for you to use in the course of the transaction. It's a one-page, kind of gives them a little calendar sheet about what has to be done when, and it's very important to make sure that you stay on top of it as a listing agent as well as a buyer's agent. I provided a buyer's checklist, and it didn't say buyer agent checklist, it said buyer's checklist. And the reason for that was because a lot of agents are new to the business. They don't understand the process. If they don't follow a guide, they're not going to know, well, this is what needs to be done during the termination option. And a lot of times the buyers don't do certain things during the termination option. And the buyers are going to look to the agents because the agents are familiar with these processes. They are aware of deadlines and what is required per the contract. So again, it's very, very important that you use all the tools that you can to make sure that everything is done based on the contract. And don't leave the changing of the closing date to the very end. The parties usually are very, very few want to negotiate. They get mad at that point. They know that your buyer might be in breach and all these different things. And that's not our goal. Our goal is to stay on top of it and make sure all parties go to closing. That's our real goal that we have as agents in the transaction. Okay, let's see what we've got here. There's a lot of mute questions going on here. Let's see. It talks about, is it required that these same COVID forms be given to inspectors and others? Yeah, anybody coming onto the property, the seller or landlord would want to know that. But absolutely, as I said, a lot of the inspectors have COVID-19 processes and procedures that they're following, and that's very, very important. But yes, you would want to do that. Yeah. They're saying, should they have all the buyer's agents fill out the COVID showing form, or is it up to the sellers? Now, the listing agent is the one, if you coordinate the approval for showings, then based upon what your seller is requiring, that's what you're going to do. If your seller says anybody can come into the property, no problem. I think in agent remarks, you would definitely say that the seller has, opened it up. You don't have to do anything, whatever it might be on something like that. Let's see. All right, what have we got here? A lot of muting questions. Let's see. There's a question about they want to have a listing agreement, but they don't want any showings on the property. What will happen, the HAR 300 must be used if 6A1B is marked. And what will happen is, even though there are no showings, it will reflect all the days on market will still add up. The minute you make it go active, it will be counting those days on market. Okay. All right. You know, last but not least, we want to make sure that everybody personally, all of you, take good precautions, that you don't use unnecessary risk. And what I'm saying, being safe, I'm not just talking about COVID-19. I'm going to give you a perfect example. We had a situation in the San Antonio area where an agent was locking up the property after an inspection had been performed on her listing. And apparently, a couple drove up and they said, "Oh, can we see your property? Can we see your listing?" And she said, "Sure, come on in." They beat her up, took her cars, her keys, her purse, and everything else. So don't let your guard down ever. And we talk about this, and there's advisories in MLS. You don't get into a property without an appointment. But as an agent, you're not going to meet somebody who just drove up and said, "Sure, come on into my listing." That type of thing. Please, please be very safe. And that's what I say, both from a health standpoint as well as your security. Carry your license with you at all times. What I am going to tell you is next month, okay, this one. There is no ramifications for a seller that doesn't sign the COVID-19 form. No seller has to agree to that. There is no ramification for that. What your buyer has done is you just go forward knowing that your time frame needs to be adhered to, because the seller didn't give you the ability to terminate if you're not individually approved after the number of days have passed. Appraisals. Okay, something is all, let's go in here. Appraisals are coming in much lower. I'm not going to tell you that I can give you a dollar amount, but on every given week, I got probably about 9 or 10 last week that didn't meet, and they range from $6,000 to $20,000 that the appraisals were off. As I said before, appraisers are not supposed to adjust the market before it reveals itself in the data. It feels like that as a buyer's agent and as a buyer as well, that the appraisers are taking into effect what the market might be in 6 months or whatever on something like that. That's not how they're supposed to work. That's what our knowledge is. But I'm going to tell you, when your buyer commits to a lender, you're going to ask that lender. Remember I said you're going to have this three-way with them prior to an offer. You're going to ask the lender, have your appraisals been coming in lower? And if so, find out a little bit more information about that. They are a wealth of knowledge and information on something like this, and you really need to take advantage of it on something like that. Are you seeing increased credit scores required to interest rates? We're seeing a lot of crazy things going on with, for the first time ever, the secondary market is out there, and they're not going to buy these loans if they see a lower credit score and these other things. This is what really, really happened when we had the FHA fiasco. Buyers approved, buyers ready to close. We had them at the closing table the Thursday before Good Friday, and the lender called and said, "Stop it. We're not going to be able to do the loan." They're worried about that secondary market picking up these loans with lower credit scores and those type of things. I think interest rates are really good. Is there a cookbook that lists what is required, should be on existing listings? No, I don't have a cookbook, but boy, are we cooking a lot lately and trying recipes on those types of things. I know years ago I gave a template on something like that as far as what should be on the existing listings, and it really fluctuates too. It's not something that's a one-time thing. It has to be adaptive to what's going on in our market, and we've got plenty of things going on in our market right now. But whatever you want to do, you certainly can add it to the listing agreement. Somebody's talking about shoe covers. that they have just inside the door to my listing. I also ask agents and remarks to please wear masks, but so far no one has used shoe covers or brushes. If property is vacant, how can I get showing agents to buy? I don't know how you're going to get showing agents to abide by that. It is unfortunate that they're not taking your great advice, but you know, that's human nature. There are some people that are adverse to doing those type of things. Sarai just wants you to know that all the handouts that I did bring up today are out there and were given to you last week. Do you still need the HAR 300? You will absolutely need the HAR 300 form if you do not put it in MLS within what? 3 days. There is no marketing or anything. So that has to be there anytime you mark 6A1B and say no more than 14 days. And then you have to attach the HAR 300 on something like that. Some provided trash, and it says they will know that the ones at the door are not used. That's a good sentiment on that. Can you please put it on slide number 7? I have it on slide number 7 of my slides. Again, you just really need to be careful about timelines and time frames and all this. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to do next month. I talked earlier when Colleen asked that question about when do they have to have the pictures up on listings. What we're going to do, half of the session is going to be about your MLS rules and regulations, abiding by the coming soon status and all the various things. The second part of the session is going to be about the issues that have come to light when listing agents have sellers that might be asked secondary questions. It's all going to be Seller Shield. Bo Blackburn did a presentation a couple of weeks ago, and a lot of the ideas were brought up that we keep going over and over about the seller's disclosure. But it's real important. We're going to take it in the context and frame of listing agents and their risk. And just to give you a little example of this, this is what happened. The listing agent was called by the buyer agent or sent an email, and the buyer's agent said, oh, the seller left this blank, right? And so what is, please get this completed. And the listing agent, without missing a beat, responds and answers. That's a problem for the listing agent because now it becomes their disclosure, not the seller. So we're going to go through that whole process. There might be a little learning curve for new listing agents, but existing listing agents, you better be very careful. You don't ever respond about the condition of the property. You're going to quote the source from the source, and it is always going to be your seller. They either did it in writing or they're going to do it in writing. No verbal, no explanation of things. And so it's really critical, as well as knowing what your MLS rules and regulations are. It affects mostly listing agents, obviously, because of that, but buyer's agents need to know that too. We had a transaction last month where the buyer agent was being, the buyer in the contract was being asked, please don't, put it in MLS under pending or pending show for backup. They wanted to keep it active. And I said, well, you can't do that. It's a violation of MLS rules. So we'll go into more detail on that because of, yes, it all applies. If you have a listing agreement right now, it has to all comply with the rules and regulations that will be there as of May 1st, as well as HAR 300 or any other thing. All of the COVID applies to it. You haven't been released from everything as usual in your area. So again, just make sure you follow all these. Yes, that's why you can't help the seller fill out the seller. It's so very important. But a lot of times you let your guard down as a listing agent. This is what I'm worried about. And you'll respond to something that really you shouldn't be responding to. It's not your property. And what happens is that you just do it because you might know something, right? But it's better if your seller hasn't completed something that they absolutely complete it. And as a listing agent, your seller needs to use that tool and Seller Shield, because for the most part, they can't complete it. They can't sign and date it until it's completed, and that will be a little relief on you as a listing agent on something like that. All right, let's see if there's any last minute questions. All right, good people. I really am glad that you were able to participate today. We have a ton of them. If you are experiencing any issues about it, please contact me and let me know. As I said, we really are trying to be responsive. You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you. On something like that, my concern for you is, quite frankly, you do so many things when you take a listing or as a buyer, and you take on a tenant too, and sellers and that, and you fail to kind of stop and think, what is the best thing for me to do? And my concern for you is, while you may have covered all of this verbally with them and they may have told you something, I want to make sure you shore that up and that you've got that in writing, so the risk is on them and not on you during this time, because you never know what crazy things will happen because of all of this. Thank you. You're welcome, hon. I miss y'all. Do you want me to share? My mother had her 100th birthday 2 weeks ago, and she hasn't laid eyes on us since February, because this nursing home in Bernie was really smart. They shut it down, and my biggest concern was that she wouldn't know who we were, because we're going to be on the outside of a window where they pull up the shade, and she kind of sees us for the first time in several months. But the minute they opened the blinds and she was able to see us, she knew exactly who we were. And so it was a wonderful ray of sunshine in this time. So please, all of you, stay safe.